You're listening to the Geek Saga podcast. This episode contains audio from a discussion panel that was recorded at San Diego Comic-Con 2023.
All right, so we're good to start. Thanks for coming, everybody. Everyone having a good Comic-Con? Cool. So what we're going to do is just do a little intro. We'll introduce each panelist up here, and then we'll kind of get the outline of what we're covering today for the podcasting panel. So first, my name is Amin. I'm a podcaster from the podcast of Ice and Fire. I also do Vassals and Kingsbury. So we started doing Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones stuff, and we do anime, manga, all kind of convention stuff. So we'll start with Tara. You can introduce yourself and what's your podcast and everything.
Hi, I'm Tara. I run Geek Saga Entertainment, which the two podcasts we have right now is a very spotty one called the Geek Saga podcast, and then our regular genre-lit podcast, which is Sagas and Sass.
Yeah, and I'm Varun Gupta. I am a BI engineer for the programming strategy team over at Amazon Prime Video, but in my free time I do a ton of podcasts about anime and manga. The biggest one is the Demon Slayer podcast, where we talk about the anime and manga Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba. Then our other really nice one that I love is Saturday Night Shagi, where we talk about the manga publisher Shogakukan.
I'm Jonathan Egan. I'm a principal in Sagas and Sass with Terra. I've also participated in Vassals of the Kingsgrave, which is a spin-off of a podcast of Ice and Fire that started from the original forums community, which is now on Discord. And we basically, as a group, try to determine what sort of genre or media we want to cover, and a subset of us all set up a podcast to do it, or times to do it.
Well, this is really going to be an interactive panel, so if you see a particular topic and you have a question related to it, feel free to come up to the mic here and ask your question. You don't have to wait till the end. You can ask a question during the course of the panel. So to get us started, let's just go into choosing a podcast topic and see how did you get into the podcast you did. For us, the podcast of Ice and Fire, we started in 2008 because we were waiting for George R. R. Martin to write the next book, which was still doing, but he got ahead by a book or two by then. So we wanted to do something to fill the time, so we started doing, podcasting was getting bigger out then, so we did an Ice and Fire podcast. We started with that and then kind of spin off and started doing other mediums like anime and manga. So how did everybody else get into podcasting, and how did you choose your topic?
So I originally got into podcasting through a means, a podcast of Ice and Fire. Listening to it, I used to cook my dinners to his podcasts. Then eventually I met him at a convention, and he invited me onto the podcast of Ice and Fire, which then evolved into Vassal of the Kingsgrave, and then I met Tara, and she wanted me basically to start a new literary podcast, and I jumped at the opportunity because I needed to read more. So while I did not initiate any of them, I was lucky enough to find this community and build a series of friendships through this community.
For me, I was kind of roped into podcasting through my older sibling, and they do a podcast called Manga Mavericks, where they talk about the manga industry. So I started guest hosting on that, and then I was like, oh, I really like this. I'm going to try doing it by myself with just some friends that I had. And then we realized that we kept talking about other topics before recording. So it reached a point where we just started making 4 or 5 podcasts at once, which is both really fun, but also a nightmare because that's a lot of editing.
Oh God, I feel you. Trust me. I only have 2, so I don't know how you do that many. My first podcast, the Geek Saga podcast, the spotty one in terms of recording, that one came about because I had been speaking on a ton of panels at conventions for years, and I always recorded them, and I didn't really quite know what the point of recording them was if I wasn't going to share those recordings. So I started by going back to, I want to say I started it in early 2017. It was early 2018. So I went back to just the previous year's panels that I'd been on, the ones that were still timely and appropriate anyway, and took those recordings and did some minor editing, very minor editing. And so that's how it started, but it's kind of evolved into a podcast that does its own series of things at a time. So last year we did Hot D Takes, which was about House of the Dragon, where we took 10 hot takes from each episode and summarized the episode and stuff. And then currently, other than putting up random recordings from conventions. We're doing a series called 90s and Naughties Cringe Factor, where we rewatch like teen rom-coms from the 90s and early 2000s and talk about how terrible they really are. It's really hard to come up with 3 things we like about them, honestly. And then Sagas and Sass, that was a pandemic podcast. It really started out as a live webcast where I just kind of took the audio from the webcasts and slapped them into podcast form, but now we've gone strictly podcasts. And as Jonathan said, it's a genre-lit podcast, so we cover usually just one series at a time. We're currently doing the Red Rising saga by Pierce Brown. That one evolved too, because it started out as just kind of, here's a brief summary, and then we're gonna shoot the shit, excuse my language, for an hour or two. But now it's a lot more structured and super detailed, like summaries and discussion of the book.
Awesome, great. The topic of editing came up, which we'll get into a little bit later, but I do want to kind of highlight the difference between this. There's one level of podcasting where you just host and you podcast and you enjoy that. And then there are those who suffer as the editor. That's a different role. We'll get into that. Those who edit know what I'm talking about. So it's kind of 2 different levels of experience. So let's move on to finding hosts and co-hosts. If you want to not do it yourself, because there's a divide there. Like the easier way to do it is if you do it with people you know already, either online or in person, because you already have chemistry. For us, it was harder. At that time, we didn't know a lot of people were into the series, so we just met online and then we kind of formed the chemistry over time. So I'm just curious, how did you find your co-hosts, if you have any, and was it online? Did you know them already, or did you meet them online?
Well, I mean, Sagas and Sass is obvious. For that one, we were deep in 2020, and my day job was very, very busy, and I needed something to like unwind that wasn't playing Red Dead Redemption. So I put up a post on Facebook like, hey, I need to read more, and I'm looking for people who are interested in talking about book series. And we did the Grishaverse first, and the show was coming out in 2021, the first season. So I was like, I want to get these episodes out before this show comes out, So I put a Facebook post up, and it was all my friends. And honestly, with the Geek Saga one, that one's kind of all over the place. The current series that we've been doing, the Hot D Takes one, and then the 90s and Naughties one, it's the same co-host for each. He kind of just followed me from Hot D Takes into 90s and Naughties because he's a really great co-host. But I found him kind of the same way. I was like, I want to do a House of the Dragon podcast, but I need my co-host to be somebody who has not read the books. So that's how I found that co-host. So yeah, it's always been people I've known. I mean, I've definitely been on podcasts with people I don't know, but honestly, I've been kind of in this industry, geek industry for lack of a better term, for so long that I know a lot of people and I have a lot of friends who are interested in doing these sort of things. So it's made it kind of easy, much more easy than you guys had it.
Yeah, for me, I kind of met most of my co-hosts through Twitter before Twitter became the nightmare that it is right now. But yeah, I think especially since I kind of cover anime and manga news, the anime and manga news community is pretty closely knit, I feel. So I already knew quite a few people that had been on podcasts before or were interested in doing podcasts. So for instance, for my Demon Slayer podcast, most of the people on there are people that I just talk to in my free time about Demon Slayer. So it kind of just made sense to record our conversations and just make it a bit more organized and then release it. Might as well make content out of everything we're talking about. And then for Saturday Night Shoggy, one of my friends already was reporting a ton of news on Shogakukan manga on Twitter. And we wanted to kind of just get a bigger reach out there in a different format. And so I talked to him about kind of just doing a podcast about it. And we just went from there and just planned out how we wanted to do our episodes. So I feel like I wouldn't necessarily do a podcast with strangers because I personally don't really feel like I can get that exact chemistry with people right off the bat. But I think I really like having these conversations with friends and making those into podcasts.
Not to jump on Jonathan's turn, but I will say this, that most of, other than Jonathan really, and my friend Nami, who isn't currently doing Sagas and Sass with us but is coming back soon, other than them, the two of them, the friend I do the Geek Saga stuff with and my other friend Nick, I would say barely more than acquaintances with them, and doing the podcast with them has made them some of my closest friends, which is really nice.
So as Tara mentioned, she sent out a Facebook invite, and I jumped on it, and with a little bit of announcement of false advertising, because it was originally, I want to do this Sagas and SAS podcast and start with the Red Rising series, which I was all gung-ho and excited about. And then it took 3 years plus to get to the Red Rising series as we did
Listen, he was taking
first,
forever with the books.
And then the Naomi Novak series of Temeraire after that, and on and on and on. But since I've been on that podcast, I've been far less active with the Vassals podcast, and I have, over the last few years, tried to get up a group of vassals to discuss Babylon 5, and I've failed twice, and I'll probably try again soon, because I hear there's some new people on the Discord server who are interested in it, so maybe I can get a couple of Babylon 5 episodes.
Awesome. Well, our next topic will be, do you have a question? Yeah, come on. Yeah.
So I have a podcast right now with 3 people, and one of them is sleeping. And my good friend and I, he's like, maybe we should bring in my girlfriend. Yeah, exactly. Is there a nice way? I mean, I know you gotta be professional and honest with your partner and talk to them and whatnot, but...
I mean, honestly, that's not a situation I've been in with a podcast, but I ran Ice and FireCon for a decade, and we have a small council, and I had put a rule out a couple of years ago or so, I think, when my significant other was like, I mean, if you need a small council member, because we had a spot to fill, and I was like, I really don't think that's a good idea. So, like, honestly, I think just being professional about it and saying, like, hey, I think we need to have a rule, like, no significant others on the podcast, because, I mean, I don't even think you have to, like, couch it or give a reason. I think that's a professional rule to have, honestly, just no significant others, unless they're just guesting. But as a regular host.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking for a new regular host.
Yeah.
So is there a benefit to maybe... He lives in Canada, I live in the US, and is there a benefit to, right now our third one is his friend that brought in, and now we're all friends. So I'm wondering if there's a benefit to bringing in someone we don't know as our third, and like having that kind of answer, or if there's something about bringing in someone both of us know, or maybe only one of us knows, like that kind of dynamic, if you have any experience with that.
So we actually had that experience where we often lost hosts. If you're going to bring somebody else, try them for a few episodes first. Kind of like an audition process with different people, and you can see who fits. And then make the final decision. And then your question, I think, a little bit broad. I mean, you gave a specific example of a significant other, but just like, how do you add a new host? I would have everybody who's currently on it be happy with it. So it doesn't matter if it's a significant other or whatever. If you're not happy with it, then don't bring them on. So that can be your way to stop it. Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
So the next topic is planning episodes, how scripted it is. But I'm bringing it up as an example because we're going to go off script now. Because you mentioned a few things, I want to talk to that before we get into there. The first was just the relationships you form through podcasting, like with your podcasters, but also with your audience. I think is really interesting. And a lot of times it's people, like John, you said even your wife was listening while you were cooking, and getting to know me, well, I didn't know them until I met them here. So it's kind of this interesting one-way relationship where your listeners get to know you and know your voice, and then suddenly they meet you and you get to learn to meet them then. So have you experienced that? And the other question I'm going to put to the panel is, I think we all have long-running podcasts, but I'm curious if you know anyone who's just on a short topic, because I don't think you need to jump in and do a podcast for years and years. You could just choose a 5 or 10 episode podcast, I think, and do that. So any thoughts on that as well?
I've never done short form unless you count like the series that I do with the Geek Saga podcast. But in terms of like meeting listeners, again, mine kind of is like the opposite, where usually people come to my podcasts and webcasts from like me talking about them at conventions, honestly. With the exception of with the Geek Saga podcast, I do, this year's the 7th year, I think. 6th or 7th year. Every year for over 5 years, we've been doing what I call Drinkin' Con, which is a pre-Dragon Con webcast. It's actually a live webcast. I do turn it into a podcast, which is another messy editing story. But I've been doing that for years, and I have people come up to me at Dragon Con and be like, oh my gosh, I watched your Drinkin' Con podcast or webcast. That is so funny. So like that's literally the only experience I've had, and it's a very like specific once a year niche. So
for me, I feel it's kind of weird because like we've had like interactions with people that are listening to our podcast that are actually much closer to us than we expected. Like one of my co-hosts, they're like cousin. just found our podcast randomly and started actively listening to it. And then we found out, we're like, wait, what? How did you even know about this when we never even told you about it? So it's kind of funny when that happens, that you're reaching people that you didn't expect. And it's honestly kind of satisfying when like someone tells you, like even online or through an email, like, hey, I got into this series because you talked about it, or like so enthusiastic about it. So yeah, it's really cool like having that fan interaction.
In more detail, when I listened to Amin's podcast originally, they mentioned on the podcast that there was this convention of Ice and Fire that they had gone to in Ohio, in this small little bed and breakfast that looked like a castle in the woods. And it sounded like great fun, so then my wife and I dragged my wife to it. She wasn't that enthused to go. And we had a great time. That's where we met Tara, and then friendships formed, and it just became part of our lives. And so this community has been very important to me, especially during the pandemic, because a lot of the activities during the pandemic were people I met through that Ice and Fire Con community and some of the podcasting community to keep us sane during the pandemic. We had meetups and Zooms and Hangouts and games over the line, so it was very valuable to me anyway.
So for anyone who already has a podcast, if you have a special experience or a listener or something you want to share, feel free to come up. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next topic. Come up at any time or any other question. So when you're planning episodes, just curious, what do you do if you're planning phase? Do you ever go as far as having like a fully scripted podcast? I don't. I just use a Google Doc. I put the general topics we're covering, and we can follow that. But feel free to stray from it. That's the approach I take. I'm curious.
Yeah, for me, I stick to the Google Doc format as well. Kind of just like general bullet points of like what we want to talk about. I guess like one thing I've been pushing for recently with us is like bringing on more people in manga localization, because I feel localization for manga especially is like very underrepresented, especially on the lettering front. So for like when we do those types of episodes, I try to like do some research on the guest, and then try to like get a few bullet points on like different conversation starters with them to kind of get an idea of who they are and like what kind of is really going into the weeds with their work. But generally, I feel like me and my co-host kind of like will always somehow diverge completely from our plan. So we kind of just like play it by ear and go with the flow, and whatever happens, happens. That's what editing's for at the end.
Yeah, I've never done a fully scripted one. I definitely have listened to them, and I think they can totally work, but I think you really need like the right couple people. Assuming nobody's memorizing the entire script, you need people who are going to be able to read without sounding like they're reading. With the Geek Saga podcast, like the series that we do, those are literally just 10 bullet points or whatever of like 10 cringy things about the movie that we just watched, those sort of things. But the Sagas and Sass one, it was way more freeform when we started, and then we added a few episodes in, we added summaries of what we were covering in that episode, and those of the book we were covering. So like we would usually cover, let's say if the book is split into 3 parts, we'd cover part 1 in an episode. So we'd write a not super detailed summary of part 1. Well, those summaries have evolved and become way more detailed, probably too detailed, honestly. So I guess you could say like the first like 10 minutes or so of our episodes is scripted in a way. And we do nowadays we share a lot more like quotes and stuff. So there is scripting in there, but the fun part about it is like seeing where the conversation goes. Like the time that Jonathan, we were reading Red Rising. I don't know if any of you have ever read it, but there's this character who supposedly talks in a really deep voice. So he says his name in the book, and it should be like if you're reading it, like really low, and Jonathan says, and it's just become like a huge joke with us. And I was actually both when we were doing the podcast and when I was editing it, I was just cracking up over it. And that's the sort of thing that I think is what makes podcasts like more interesting to listen to, is when there's just little moments like that you absolutely know came out of nowhere, and those are the best ones usually.
Just want to give a quick advertisement before you go, John. There's a dogfight activation site outside. You can scan your badge and get it.
Well, I mean, that was totally spontaneous at the time. But I must admit, I sort of prefer the freeform. And the Vassal stuff I've done is almost all completely freeform. Mostly because most of the Vassals podcast episodes that I participated in have been instant reactions to either a TV show or a movie or a book. And occasionally I did, I think, 1 or 2 books, but it was much more instant reactions, so there wasn't really time to script anything. We just sort of decided online with a few days notice, let's do this on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, people are different. I like to have the writing out the notes there. Some people just like to look over it and not do anything because they have an idea what's coming up. It also helps if you're having a guest on and then they're feeling nervous. You can set the notes down. This is what I'm roughly talking about. This is what I'm going to ask about. So you get an idea of what's coming.
So I had a question about kind of free form content. How do you handle having a good sense of like when to wrap up? Like when people kind of make their points?
I guess it depends on if you're live or not, right? If you're just recording and they're your friends and you're not worried about kind of hurting their feelings or whatever, you can literally just say, okay, guys, we got to wrap this up now. If you are live, it makes it a little bit harder, honestly, and that's part of the reason why I so rarely do live webcasts anymore. But generally, it's kind of like, okay, we're time, guys, time.
Yeah, the live versus recorded is important. Also, if you know they have to go in an hour or something, they have limited time. If you know they have limited time in a couple hours, then you can give it more leeway. But if you know you have limited time, then yeah, it becomes an experience. But you think you've caught, but you have to, if they're going on off thread, there's a really good off thread, that might be better than what you planned to cover. Mm-hmm. So you have to make a judgment on the fly. And that just comes from experience and doing it over time.
Yeah, and I think it's important that even if you don't officially have a moderator, you sort of, as a group, we sort of know Tara is our moderator on Sagas and Tasks, or if I'm on a Dean's podcast, the me tends to be the moderator, and we just go with their flow. If they're ready to wrap it up, we wrap it up.
Awesome, thank you.
Good question, thanks. All right, let's talk about recording equipment a bit, and I just wanted, the bare minimum you can do to get in there is get a headset. Like, it doesn't have to be the most advanced thing, but get a headset to prevent echo, because if one person's audio quality is bad, it ruins the experience. I know from my own podcast people that's my initial comment, but I'm just curious like what kind of equipment do people use?
I'm going to be embarrassing because I have this weird computer that whenever I try to plug in a headset, we got a hiss constantly. So my computer has actually been better without a headset, so I haven't been using one.
Well, do you have headphones at least? Like,
no, I've got nothing, and it just, every time I've tried to use anything, it just hisses horribly, so I probably need a new machine.
Sounds like it.
I don't really use like a headset, but I use like a wired like Sony earbuds, just because I prefer earbuds over like a traditional.
You don't want that echo coming back. I'm not saying you have to talk in it, but you need something to go in your ear. You don't want the echo coming from.
I can't stand earbuds. So my previous setup was just headphones. I can't remember the brand, but they were nice, like, I don't know, $90 headphones or something. But they did not have, like, I had an actual, that mic right there, the blue one, on an arm at my desk. The problem with that, and I don't know if it was the mic I got or the room I was in or whatever, but that mic had terrible echo. Like, no matter what I did, no matter how much I played with the gain and the volume, and I had I can't remember what it's called, the little filter thing that you put in front of the microphone. I had one of those, obviously. But so now, currently, at the moment, I am using a SteelSeries headset, which is a gaming headset. It's a really nice gaming headset. But the SteelSeries, the first version I had, lasted me years and years and was amazing. Like, the sound quality, honestly, was as good or better than any mic I've ever heard people record on. But this is like the third set I've had of them, and the last one died on me, and this one is now giving me popping noises randomly throughout my recordings. So on Prime Day, I bought a Cherry microphone. And Cherry, they used to do mixers. They probably still do, but it's a sound company that's been around for a long time. It wasn't like the cheapest Prime Day deal, but I looked up reviews and everything, and I really liked what they were saying. One of the things being, I think the one I have is a Cherry. It's like 9.0 or something like that. So it's the highest level of their mics, and the entire microphone glows red when you're muted, which is amazing. I haven't actually recorded with it yet, so I can't promise anything about sound quality, but the reviews I read, and I did listen to some recordings that people did on it in the reviews as well, sounded really good. So I've got my fingers crossed that the recording is good, because I really like the fact that it glows red when I'm muted, because I don't usually mute myself, but when I do, I'd say at least 50% of the time I forget to unmute myself.
So you don't have to break the bank, is my overall point. Like,
no.
If you guys started $30 to $100, if you get something good. And what's interesting, we all do online stuff. So if you record it in person with people, then that's something you have to specifically look for.
I would say like the cherry mic normally runs like 120, which is about the same as the blue mics. And then the little snowball ones, those are way cheaper. Those are like $50 or less. And I have a lot of friends who have been podcasting for like a decade or more who use the little snowball ones and love them. So you can get a mic for fairly affordable prices. Like you said, you don't have to break the bank, but some sort of headphones, even if they're earbuds. I like over ear just because I don't like earbuds, but also I like having that just sort of, I can't hear anything else around me. So.
Yeah, I guess on the microphone front, I definitely can second the snowball. I have a lot of friends that still use a snowball and it comes out great. I'm not a fan of the Blue Yeti though. For some reason, it always picks up way too much sound, and I hate it.
I think it's too strong. I think it might be better if you're doing it with two people in person. I think it's better designed for multiple people.
Yeah,
I feel
you might
like
be
it's
right.
overkill for one person. Like it gets a dogfight great quality though.
Yeah. I mean, like right now, I kind of spent a lot of money on a microphone. It's a Rode MT1A, which is like a really nice microphone, but I wouldn't recommend starting out with that. But if you want to get into podcasting, just go with like a blue snowball. It's going to sound good. And I feel like at the end of the day, you're going to be able to fix a lot, once you're editing and going through the entire process.
That's interesting, though, that I'm not the only one. Now I feel better that I'm not the only person who's just had not a great experience with the Blue Yeti. I was like,
this. I had to go in a closet to record just to keep it the outside. And it worked.
Yeah, honestly, I honestly was like, is it me? Is it my room? Did I just get a bad mic? But no, I think you're right now that I'm thinking about it. I don't know that it, well, I mean, I lived by myself when I was using it too. So there wasn't really a lot of background noise for it to pick up, but it was just very tinny and echoey. So.
Well, quick question here, and we'll get into editing, is just how often do you record? We don't record that often anymore, but the ideal is, I think, to record, or at least release the episode at least once a week is the ideal, because if you start going longer, which we do, you just lose people, is my experience. But I'm curious what release and record you started with and what are you on now?
Well, Sagas and SAS is basically trying to do it every other week. And we're pretty consistent about it. Life has gotten in the way in the last few months. But for the most part, we've been pretty consistent with every other week.
Yeah, when we were doing the live webcasts every other week was about all we could handle. Again, that's a different thing. So once we switched to just doing podcast recordings, we still record every other week, but we record 2 episodes at a time at least. So we're still putting out content, or we are putting out content about every week. I probably need to be better about actually putting the content out on the same day every week, but editing takes a long time. So we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, my release schedule has gone all over the place. Demon Slayer podcast started out as weekly, then it went to monthly, then every other month, then back to weekly. But now, since I do so many podcasts, I try to at least record something once a week and then get it out onto some feeds. So at least if there's some sort of content that I'm involved with, it's out there and people can listen to it, and then they can reference the other podcasts as well.
I think it ties into, and we'll get to this a little bit later, is just why are you podcasting? If you're just doing it as a hobby, then you shouldn't feel stressed, I have to get it out now or something. If you're trying to get to the point you're monetizing or it's part of your career, then you need to get it out frequently. But if it's a hobby, you have leeway, or once you establish an audience, they're willing to tolerate more. But if you're starting, you put an episode and you don't do one for months later, they think you're gone.
Yeah.
Coming back. Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about my pain, which is editing. So I go by the 3-to-1 rule. So I'm the main editor as well as a host. And so the 3-to-1 means every hour of recorded episode, we pretty much do recorded episodes. It takes me 3 hours to edit, and that's a minimum, I think.
Oh, that's a minimum, yeah.
But if it's video, it's even worse.
I never edited the videos, honestly, but yeah, the sound for sure. I would say for me, it's probably more than 3 hours per
And
hour.
I will use a cooking analogy as well. You go and you enjoy a really good meal, that's great. That's just the podcaster who records or somebody who listens. But the chef who's working there and toiling is the editor in the back and putting it all together. So, but you need them. You could do, if you do a live podcast, there's no chance for editing, or you could do a podcast with minimal editing, but everybody needs some editing. Everybody has ums and gaps and stuff such like that. It actually helps. And you also, if you have a good editor, it helps the quality of your podcast, because one of the things I noticed is like when you're recording with people, and people kind of, everybody self-censors a little bit. They don't say everything comes to their mind, because sometimes it's good, sometimes it's horrible. So you self-censor. And so you only get, let's say, 80% of what the person can get to their 100%. But if you know you have a good editor, then they give you 110%, and the editor cuts back to 100%. So if you have a good relationship, and you know the editor is going to edit, and I always tell the guests we're going to edit, we're not going to put it out raw episode, then it can make the really good podcast increase the quality. So if you have any comments on editing, I don't know if any of you editing or thoughts on that.
I hate it so much. Honestly, my personal problem is I am extremely type A. I think that if I was going to turn editing over to somebody, I would probably have to write like a 30-page document on all the things that I edit out or fix, etc. When we first started, especially with Sagas and Sassin, I mentioned earlier with the Geek Saga podcast, when I was just sharing convention panel recordings, I did no editing, and I do not ever listen to those episodes, honestly. The current ones, like Amin said, the 3-to-1 rule, I think it's probably more than that for me, just because I am very, very picky about all the things I want to remove, and like not everybody's mic, that's the other thing too, not everybody's mic quality is the same. Like until you get to the point where you're maybe earning money or have a wealthy backer, or you yourself are independently wealthy and can buy everybody that you're hosting with the same microphone, et cetera, and there would still even be slight differences depending on environment, but unless you're all recording with the same exact equipment in soundproof rooms, you're probably going to need to play with sound levels and stuff too in post, which my editing journey was I don't do any to, okay, I'm going to crop out long rants that don't need to be there, and lots of likes, you knows, I mean is my latest thing. I never used to cut those out, and now I'm like, get rid of it. So then again, most recently, I started playing with the...
How do you cut out dog barks?
I know, right?
Maybe the dogs also hate editing.
They're really yelling about it out there. So I started playing with the effects and stuff in Audacity, and I'm actually playing with volume levels, and we don't really have any echo issues, but just generally trying to make it so that everybody sounds, because I also have a problem where I trail off and my voice can get pretty low, as I'm sure you can tell right now. So I will be reading a quote or something, and the end of it will be like, so playing with like making that louder so you can actually understand what I'm saying without having to turn your volume up to 100, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's again why my editing takes way too long.
Yeah, I feel editing is always the biggest pain point for any podcast. Initially, when I started the Demon Slayer podcast, we had an editor, but then he got busy with life and it all got thrown onto me. So I kind of like just went with it and just kept doing it. And I feel like now I have it down to a formula where usually it takes me 3 hours for 1 hour of audio. But sometimes if the audio is really good and there's no issues, I can maybe get it down to 2 hours of editing. But it's kind of tough. Initially I was starting out with Audacity too. Recently I switched to a different software called PreSonus Studio One, which helped me remove a lot of background noise and kind of isolate out different parts of the audio, so I can just mix and arrange it. So that's helped a little bit, but it's one of those things where I feel like it's kind of helpful to be the editor when you're a podcaster, because then you kind of, when you're podcasting, you start to notice the little tics that you have or things that you're doing that you could just remove when you're talking, or you keep in mind, so that when you get to editing, you can maybe not have to worry about it.
Well, that's an excellent point. I actually think everyone, even if you have a main editor, it is worth yourself as a podcaster to do edit a couple episodes just to get that experience. It will improve your podcasting. You listen to yourself and with a critical eye. People dread silence. So when you're talking in person with people, it's a little bit more, you might actually be silent because you can see them, but if you're online, you feel like you have to fill the gap. But actually, if you have nothing to say, if you're thinking about it, just be silent. It sounds weird when you're recording it, but be silent while you think, and the editor can just take that all out in 1 second. But if you keep saying, I'm just trying to fill the silence, it's actually harder to remove it. You gotta get used to that, being silent. Okay, ready for the next topic thing. And you can actually edit a lot in Audacity as well. Like you can still do a lot of the stuff in Audacity. Some people use more sophisticated software where if you want to invest in that, it actually converts to a text format, and then you can kind of like cut out the honest things that they show up on really quickly. But it is available if you're willing to pay that, so that's cool to know.
Yeah, I feel like for most use cases, Audacity is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I'd say like you really only need to invest in other software if you specifically know what that software will give you that like you need for your podcast or will make like what you do easier. But yeah, most people just use Audacity. It's free.
Good. So we'll move on to distributing your podcast. And iTunes has always been the classic one we put in, and we put on Google Podcasts as well. Anyone else put anywhere else, or YouTube, for example?
I host all of mine on my own websites. I know a lot of people will pick like a specific podcast service like Podbean or whatever, and I know Spotify not that long ago added like a thing where you can host directly through them and whatever, but I like doing it through my own website because then I always have a backup, honestly. But also when you are doing it through your own website and you just push it out through an RSS feed, it goes to every podcasting service that will pick it up. So you can find the Geek Saga and Sagas and Sass podcasts on every platform. Honestly, there are platforms and apps, like podcasting apps and stuff that I've never even heard of, where if I Google one of my shows, I'll be like, what the heck is this? I've never even heard of this. But there's my show on it because I, pushed it out through the RSS feed. So
I think all my podcasts are hosted through Spotify except for one that I don't do the editing for. And yeah, I feel like for me, at least my personal experience with it has been pretty easy because like I think at least Spotify for podcasters lets you do like similar thing where the RSS feed is not automatically sent to the platform. Like say, I think Apple Podcasts usually have to manually do it.
yeah.
But like usually otherwise we'll just like do it for you. It's pretty convenient. I've dabbled with YouTube a little bit, but honestly our podcasts have never done super well on there, so I kind of just gave up. But maybe it's somewhere to explore in the future.
They've been pushing, they have YouTube podcasting now, and I keep getting emails about it and telling myself, I should probably set these up on YouTube. But
they have an actual system that you can just, because before we would just convert it to have a still image of something and upload it. And it catches people that are there, that are different audiences.
yeah, I haven't explored it yet, so I don't know how different it is from just uploading your audio as a video or whatever. I mean, I'm sure they're calling it YouTube podcasting, so it is actually just an audio thing. But yeah, I haven't looked into it too much. I don't know if I would. And since it just started, I would say maybe don't choose that as your main host quite yet.
Yeah. For instance, it's like a dedicated section on your YouTube channel, so that's kind of the nice thing that all your podcasts will just be all there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something I want to explore as well, actually.
I don't think we want to go to YouTube directly because sometimes people are quickly finishing dinner as we start podcasts. Which we wouldn't be doing if we knew we were actually going to be live on video.
You say that, and yet we've had that happen.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. If anyone has a burning question, they can come up. We have one main topic to cover to come up with any questions. What we're going to be talking about is two really related topics: promoting your podcast, and then just the idea of monetizing. And they both go to the ultimate root of what are you trying to do with your podcast? Is it a goal? I think there's a spectrum, really. It can be a pure hobby, and then it can be a hobby where maybe I'll try to get some money to make up for my time, and then it can be, no, I actually want to monetize it. So I want to see where you fall on that spectrum, or even if you're not toward the monetizing side, you know what's some good options there, and then went over to Patreon or other sites like that, or advertising. We've done paid advertising, so I'm curious if anyone has experience, and if we don't, maybe from the audience as well. But let's talk about that, promoting or monetizing the podcast. Does anyone actually do that? I'm curious.
Yeah, so
I do monetize.
So yeah, I actually recently started doing monetization because now I think for select podcasts, Spotify for podcasters allows you to add new ads into your podcast that are just automatically curated by Spotify. So those have been doing pretty well for us. That being said, I haven't really explored any other avenues like getting direct sponsors. I've gotten a few offers in the past, but honestly, it's never been from companies that I've been interested in, and the payout hasn't really been worth it because I don't want my podcast to just be a giant ad read. And personally for me, since I already work in entertainment, it's not my podcasts are something I do for fun. Mm-hmm. Whatever profit or attention they get is kind of a nice little bonus on top.
Yeah, I haven't monetized anything directly, but a lot of it is because like I've gotten a couple offers, but nothing that I would want to interrupt, my recording to insert an ad about. We do have a Patreon, so there's that, and that can be, ours isn't very big in terms of money per month, but it's enough to help pay for the hosting and stuff, which is nice. But, if you're going to use Patreon, you really have to research what you're going to offer based on what other podcasts or similar services offer, and make sure that you're giving people something that they're going to feel is worth paying for, which is a lot harder than you would think, because weirdly enough, for me, it's really just people who want to support us, unless very rarely do they actually listen to the early releases of the episodes or anything. They wait until they're live on Spotify or wherever. So if you have a good friend base that's willing to help support you, that's awesome. But if you don't, you really need to put the work into curating a Patreon that's going to actually give people something that they want, and that's honestly half a job in and of itself, and keeping up with it can be exhausting on top of all the recording and editing, etc.
I actually don't like to, when I listen to other podcasts, I don't like to listen to ads, so that's why I don't put it in my own. But I can tolerate it though, but I do like the podcast, it's kind of like fan support. So I don't like to put ads, but I do like if some people offer free giveaways for the audience, and I'm like, okay, I'll do ads and get a free t-shirt or whatever, or that kind of thing. But yeah, other than that, maybe it's, I think Vassal sometimes got some YouTube revenue, I think, because they put it on YouTube and they had ads from that, so that's also an option. But it's not easy, but if you get, as he was talking about this last year when he says, if you get to about 5,000 or 10,000 subscribers or more, at that point people do start coming out and be able to start offering to do advertisements, will pay you this and you put it in. So you will hear from people. So
yeah.
I mean, I think Vassals gets about $50 to $100 a month from various sources. Primarily the money just put right back into the hosting, and if there's any additional money. I mean, the community is so big, it's to pay $2 each host would just make no sense. So I think it's mostly donated to charity or that extra money.
Okay, just want to do one more topic here is transferable skills into and out of podcasting. One initial point I want to make is when you listen to some of your earlier podcasts, it's actually kind of like a diary. It's interesting. I had that view about something 5 or 10 years ago. It's another reason to do podcasting, just to see how you change over time. But I think there's a lot of skills you can bring into podcasting and take out. If you already have public speaking skills, then great, you can bring it in. If you don't, you need to work on it. It's a good place to practice it on a topic you're passionate about, and then you can transfer that skill out to work on something you're not passionate about, and you use it there. So it's interesting if you have any other transferable skills or experiences where you brought in skills from work or vice versa, you develop something that may be useful outside of podcasting.
My day job has nothing to do with any of this, so nothing from day job has really transferred to this. But I would say the opposite. I would say that just being a moderator, particularly of convention panels, podcasts, whatever, not only gives you that public speaking experience, but it gives you organizational skills and kind of that ability to think of something to say at the drop of a hat. And that's definitely helped me in presenting stuff for my day job, and also honestly I think in getting my current day job, with interviews and everything. So that's a plus.
I'm one of those people that puts my podcast on my actual resume. And when I was applying to a lot of entertainment and gaming jobs back in the day, it actually got a lot more attention on my resume because of that. And I guess in my current job, since Prime Video internationally has a lot of anime, for instance, being knowledgeable about that stuff and talking about it has been helpful in the office in various ways. So it's been interesting seeing that kind of little connect happen.
Oh, we got some questions here.
Yes, first, I want to applaud you for all your podcasts and everything, and a lot of you sound like you're doing it just because you want to share your knowledge and your wisdom and everything, and I applaud you for that. That is awesome.
Thank you.
But if you want to monetize your podcast, it's intellectual property. How do you go about protecting it? Or have y'all ever looked into different ways of protecting it? Because we all know when something gets on the web, it's free game. Right. So I'm just curious if y'all have looked into any ways of maybe protecting it or doing things with it. Just curiosity.
So it's a good question. When we upload, we have to upload to the Internet Archive, and we choose a license that maintains, so you have to choose what license you're putting in. Right? If it goes on there and somebody just uses it, then in theory, you have to follow some legal means to follow up with that. Thankfully, I've never experienced that. Like someone's stealing my work and we're not monetizing it. So I wouldn't be able to speak more on it, probably just have to search on it, but I do know that when we upload it, we choose a particular license that contains the ones we don't give up control over it. So when you upload, if you go with some private service, for example, like, and you upload to them, in their terms, there might be something where they get your IP. So that is something to be careful with, depending where you upload it and what you're following is to read the license. I know that, but beyond that, I can't advise if anyone has anything on that.
Honestly, I've never really thought about it. Luckily, none of my podcasts have ever been uploaded by someone else. So I guess the monkey on that front.
Yeah, I've never had a problem either, but same as Amin, just having the licenses on your end, and then also a simple thing, because I upload them to my websites, having a copyright notice, like this is copyrighted to me at the bottom of each page of the website. I mean, honestly, it's all kind of smoke and mirrors, like somebody can still take it at the end of the day, but again, that's never happened, but if somebody does, it's easier than you would think to get a takedown.
Yeah, you can record it, and once you get enough listeners, who's going to listen to that fake one? Right?
Yeah,
It's almost like why do you even steal from people? Yeah.
There's also so many podcasts. It's like somebody would really. I don't even know how they would make any money or anything off of it if they're just going around stealing other people's podcasts. And maybe that's why it doesn't seem to happen very much.
We've got 2 minutes, so there's one more question.
I had a couple of questions. So my wife and I have been married 37 years. So we're going to do something based on our relationship, but also the fact that I'm a pretty good storyteller. I remember so many things, but I lose my keys on a daily basis. So I'm kind of weird that way. And so I need to get past, for instance, we did a kind of a practice session and put on headsets. And I did Toastmasters for a long time, so I found myself going to Toastmaster mode while I was talking. Right. And she's like, "You're really boring on the microphone." And I'm like, I know, because I keep trying to editing myself as I'm talking, so I need to be more relaxed. But a couple questions I have for you. What is a good time frame for a podcast, for instance? Half hour, hour? What keeps the audience, how long can you keep an audience entertained?
All right, quick answers, we only have a couple minutes, but I'd say half an hour to an hour is a good starting point, I think. I think it's good.
When we actually first started Sagas and Sass, one of our co-hosts was like, nobody's going to listen to this 2-hour recording we just did. And I was like, are you kidding me? Most of the podcasts I listen to are 2 hours long. So I think it really it depends on the audience that you're trying to gain. I think like with a literature podcast, it's really easy and okay to go well over an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours. But if you're doing more of like a short form thing, like if you wanted to do one about relationships, I would stick to 30 minutes, honestly.
Okay.
So it really depends on the subject.
Is that it's going to be us two, but my question was, and I was just secure, would it be good to have a moderator, for instance, to sort of moderate us as we're doing it, or would it just be us two? That was a question that came up during it. I was like, because my son has done podcasts, and I'm wondering, should I have him moderating us? Would that be a good idea?
All right, 30 seconds.
I would test it.
Yeah.
I would run a couple of tests either way.
Yeah.
And then feel what sounds better to maybe try to test it out.
But don't be afraid to release it.
Yeah.
Don't be like, I want to, then I'll see how people respond.
Okay, and then the last question is,
It'll be quick.
Just like when you write stuff, you usually write like 5 pages and you edit it down to a certain page, When you're doing your podcast, you have like a number of how much you do, and then you're cutting stuff out. Like you record 2 hours and you end up with an hour.
We do cut down sometimes, but you can also put things in an after show or keep it.
Okay.
Just get it down and then edit down. That's the way to do it. Don't self-censor while you're recording.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate all the information.
Thanks for everyone for coming.
Thank you for listening to the Geek Saga podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out other Geek Saga entertainment endeavors, including the Sagas and Sass webcast and podcast and Ice and Fire Con.